All right, and we are live from the Big Phil Palace in Aurora, Ontario, Canada. I am your host for this UFC 255 post show. I'm Phil Chertok, and today I am joined by post wrestling correspondent Eric Marcotte. Eric, how are you doing this evening?
Oh, I am fantastic. I thought we wouldn't be starting this up until 2 in the morning, so I feel as though we were blessed by the main event.
That's right. Yes, it looked like we were going to go pretty late. First and foremost, I just wanted to say, normally I'm not the host of this show. It's usually the familiar John Pollock, but fortunately, John is not with us this weekend. Fortunately for him, because he has added a new person to his family. Evie Pollock was born this week, and so his family is celebrating and certainly watching. We know they enjoyed watching UFC 255 together. But John will be back later. But instead, we have Eric, who's of course done so much great UFC coverage throughout the years on post wrestling, and he's here to help us out with this fight. So going into this event, Eric, we talked briefly earlier this week, and you seem pretty excited about this card, despite the fact that there wasn't a lot of fanfare for it.
Yeah, well, obviously this isn't one of the bigger pay-per-view events of the year. There were some fights that look like they might be a bit of fun on paper, so I can't say this is one of those cards that I was really dreading.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was excited because Valentina Shevchenko was on this card, and anybody who's been listening to these shows for a while knows that I am a huge fan of hers. But otherwise, it was a card that was. It had some good matchups that delivered on action, but lacked name recognition. So why don't we get right into it and start with the top of the card, which was Deiveson Figueiredo defending his title against Alex Perez. So what went down, Eric?
So Deiveson Figueiredo, Alex Perez. If you recall, the originally scheduled headliner for this card was Figueiredo defending his championship against one Cody Garbrandt, but Garbrandt unfortunately had to pull out, what was it, about a month ago. He tore his bicep. He got COVID. On his Instagram story today, I'm not sure if you saw this, he revealed he's had some issues with blood clots. So wishing our best to Cody Garbrandt. That can be a very serious thing. But Alex Perez took his spot, and this was the fight that we got. The action... Oh, you were going to say something there?
No, go ahead. Go on with the action.
Of course. The action begins, and Figueiredo immediately starts the fight with a pair of kicks to the body. You can see that he was definitely looking, all right, if this fight goes 25 minutes, I'm going to attack the body, punish him early. So Perez gets a body shot of his own, and he goes for a takedown. Unfortunately, this was not a good idea. It took him a while to get Figueiredo down, but once he finally did, he jumped down and he immediately gets caught in a guillotine choke. It looked like he was close to escaping, but unfortunately for Perez, he was forced to tap out, and Deiveson Figueiredo retained the UFC Flyweight Championship at 1 minute and 57 seconds of the first round. What were your thoughts on this one, Phil?
Well, it was pretty exciting from the get-go. I mean, Figueiredo went out there and wanted to establish his power like we knew he would. Perez was happy to answer. It looked like Perez cracked him with a good shot early, and Figueiredo just decided that power was not going to bother him, and he was going to come forward. But then Perez was able to land some really strong kicks. He had like a 2-kick combo where he went to the calf or the ankle and then right to the body before ultimately sort of the weird takedown sequence where Figueiredo then dives on an ankle, ends up on bottom, but spins into a guillotine that was just too strong. And Figueiredo, extremely impressive performance, just what we needed at the end of a long night of fights with a few finishes, and a very strong champion in a division that was looking pretty weak not too long ago.
Yeah, Deiveson Figueiredo, after his first fight or two in the UFC, you can tell this guy was a ton of fun. He's a super active fighter with strong jiu-jitsu and legitimate one-punch knockout power. I saw a statistic earlier this week that the only fighter that has a higher strike to knockdown ratio is Francis Ngannou. So for flyweight, this guy is a hard hitter. And then he only has one loss in the division. He's currently 9-1 in the UFC. And with that one guy, Jussier Formiga, getting cut earlier this week, it's tough to imagine somebody dethroning him right now.
Yeah. So let's talk about that next fight. I mean, he called out Brandon Moreno, who was on this card. And we don't usually do this, but why don't we just skip to that fight, which was the top of the preliminary card. And that was Brandon Moreno versus Brandon Royval. And so what went down in that one?
So yeah, this was the bout that headlined the preliminary portion of the card. Both men coming off pretty good wins in their last fight. And this fight was personally the one I was looking forward to most on this card. It was pretty much guaranteed to be entertaining. And it took no time for each fighter to run into the middle of the octagon. They just started trading. They were landing big shots, and Moreno takes Royval down in the middle of the cage. But Royval he pops right back up, and he kept going for spinning elbows, Brandon Royval did. If you recall his last fight against Kai Kara France, he was hurt early, and then he landed a spinning elbow that turned the tides, and he kept going for that one in this fight. Moreno was wise to it eventually, and while Royval was spinning, Moreno grabs his back and he drags him down to the ground. Now, naturally, when you have someone's back, you typically go for the rear naked choke, and that's what Moreno did. He went for the finish, and he was really cranking Royval's neck. It looked nasty, but Royval slips out of it. And this is when the fight-ending sequence began. So they were in an awkward position on the ground as Royval kind of goes for a leg at one point, and he gets caught in this strange position where he's eating hammer fist after hammer fist from Brandon Moreno. And you hear him, Royval that is, yell out in pain, and the fight gets stopped with a second left in the round. And as it turns out, he unfortunately dislocated his shoulder pretty badly. And Brandon Moreno wins by TKO at 4:59 of the first round.
Yeah, it was a pretty exciting fight while it lasted. It was very competitive on their feet. I liked the way that Royval was moving. He looked huge, but then Brandon Moreno was able to get that takedown, and he was able to secure this weird half twister position where he was almost able to secure a spine lock, but wasn't quite able to lock the hips down, which is why Royval didn't tap in that situation. But then unfortunately, after another scramble when Moreno got on top and Royval went to turn, he dislocated that shoulder. It looked like something that happened to him on the regular. They popped it back in. Yep. He was fine. But this sets up Brandon Moreno versus Figueiredo for the championship. Next, Figueiredo called him out. So what do you think about that fight?
I think that's clearly the fight to make at flyweight. I mean, it wouldn't shock me if Cody Garbrandt gets healthy and the UFC decides to rebook Figueiredo versus Garbrandt, just because that would sell much better on pay-per-view. But the fight to make is Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno. Brandon Moreno only has one loss in the UFC, and he has looked dominant. I think he's 7-1 now in the UFC since he debuted. So that'd be a pretty exciting matchup.
Yeah, I think that is definitely the one to make. All right, so moving on, we then go to Valentina Shevchenko defending her women's flyweight championship against Jennifer Maia. Valentina Shevchenko coming into this fight as the biggest favorite of all time in the UFC, at least in a championship fight. I don't know if it was any fight ever. So not a lot of expectation from Maia leading into this one. What were your thoughts going into this fight, Eric? We seem to have lost Eric on the feed. He might need to reconnect. I think that's what he's doing. So I'll start off then describing the action. Well, it opened up in round one with Shevchenko firing with a front kick and a punch. Oh, it looks like we have Eric back.
Eric.
No, Eric, you've returned. Oh,
I've returned?
Yes, you're here, Eric. Yes.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah. I was just getting into round one, but before that, I did ask you what your thoughts were going into this fight.
So the odds were massive, as you said, in favor of Valentina Shevchenko. She was a minus 2,000 favorite. And though typically, whenever I'd see odds like that, I would say that's ridiculous in MMA. But this is one of those few times where I kind of feel justified. I expected Valentina Shevchenko to dominate the fight, and we'll get into what happened.
Yeah, so I'll just finish up with round one. I mean, it opened up with Shevchenko throwing a front kick and a punch. She got a headlock, her typical headlock, into a takedown. Maia was able to regard, but Shevchenko landed elbows from the top and body shots. And that was really the whole first round. Not terribly exciting, but a clear 10-9 for the champion. We then went into round two, and my goodness, did we see one of the most amazing performances in the history of title challengers. Why don't you tell us about this round?
Yes. So it took less than 20 seconds for Shevchenko to take the fight back to the ground, but this time Maia pops right back up, and she finds herself, Shevchenko that is, finds herself pressed against the cage for a couple minutes as Maia racked up a bunch of control time. And with about a minute left, she took Shevchenko down to the ground, and she held her there for the remainder of the round.
Okay, so
10-9 round.
Okay, so yes, it was a clear 10-9 round, and I guess this is a good opportunity for you to rant on the commentary that you heard tonight, because this was probably one of the more this fight was the most egregious of all of them this today. So what was going on with the commentary in this fight?
Oh, well, man, I'm trying to find the words. The commentary for this fight, specifically one Joe Rogan, he was so impressed by Jennifer Maia's performance. Every time she landed anything, it got the whole treatment from him. When Shevchenko did anything, it was well, of course she's winning. I mean, of course she landed that. And when Maia won a round, well, Joe Rogan was ready to score the fight for her right then.
Yeah, this was definitely not one of Rogan's best performances. I think Cormier was guilty in this fight too, and throughout the night as well. I mean, they were just so focused on Maia and what she was doing. Good. Yeah, she's doing a good job of controlling her wrist in guard. Yeah, she's in guard losing this fight. And the theme continued into the other rounds that Shevchenko started to win. So why don't you give us a recap of the remaining rounds, and then we'll talk about what's next.
All right, so heading into round three, it's 19-19 to Joe Rogan's immense disbelief. Shevchenko lands a pair of left hands, and Maia brings her right back to the cage. Maia does land a solid pair of hooks on the break, but Shevchenko was really starting to take over the fight with her striking. Not to say she was overly active or overly aggressive, but there was a clear skill discrepancy in the striking. And her left hand, her straight left hand, became the story of the fight. She was landing it over and over and over again, and about halfway through the round, she brings Maia back down to the ground and controls pretty much the rest of the round. Clear, very clear 29-28 Shevchenko heading into round four. Round four, it's looking a lot like the last one. Left hand lands, left hand lands, left hand lands. It just can't miss. Maia was she was trying to make her way inside to close the distance, but she was getting lit up every time she tried to close the distance. She did land a pair of strong right hands at one point, but Shevchenko dragged her right back down to the ground. And this is the point where the commentary, it almost broke me. Joe Rogan could not believe that Valentina Shevchenko was grappling. She's a striker. How could she grapple? Because Joe Rogan has clearly never watched a Valentina Shevchenko fight before, who has won almost all of her fights at flyweight by dominating her opponents on the ground. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Joe Rogan couldn't believe what he was seeing. I swear I won't mention it again, but it was something. Anyways, another clear round for Valentina Shevchenko. Going into the 5th round, Jennifer Maia, hey, she knows she needs a finish, and she rushes across the octagon to try to take Shevchenko down. They exchanged right hands, and Shevchenko flurried forward, landing a few solid shots before Maia re-engaged her in the clinch. At this point, Maia's face was beginning to show the effects of the fight. Her nose was bleeding pretty heavily, and Valentina Shevchenko ends the fight with a strong spinning back fist. I scored the fight 49-46 for Valentina Shevchenko. I think everybody else did as well, including the judges, and she retained her UFC Women's Flyweight Championship.
Yeah, I scored it the same way. It wasn't always, it wasn't complete, total destruction like we're used to seeing from her, but she generally dominated this fight. She won most of the positions, even though she was pressed against the cage. Several times she was able to dig for underhooks, reverse the position, turn that into a trip. The only reason why Maia got a takedown in the second round was because of a mistake in trying to throw Maia by Shevchenko. And Shevchenko also in this fight, she showed a little bit of dog. The third round, it got dirty. They were chucking heat right at the end there. I really liked the way Shevchenko fought. She did take her down several times. She just mixes it up. She had the opportunity to. It wasn't that she was looking for the takedown per se. She has just great smarts in there, and she's able to recognize the opportunities. And that's why she's so accurate with her takedowns. So another dominating performance. Still a good showing from Maia. Maia was a big girl, tough. When she started throwing heat in the last round, she would land, and she would send Shevchenko back. But again, impressive from Shevchenko. Once again, beats a bigger woman, something that she's done a lot in her career, but has not had to do at this weight class. So I guess this sets up what's next for the champion. Where does she go from here?
So Valentina Shevchenko at this point, she's been in the flyweight division for 6 fights, 6-0, 5 of those being title fights. And she's knocked off a solid portion of the division already. But recently, we had a bit of new life added to the division when Jessica Andrade moved up about a month ago, finishing Katlyn Chookagian, who we'll talk about later, in the first round. I think Shevchenko versus Andrade is the logical next step for her. How do you feel about it?
I'm not terribly crazy about it because it's not like Andrade has done too much in the division, but she did beat somebody who recently challenged for the title, and she has some name recognition, so it's not the worst thing ever. I sort of already said this before on previous shows, but Valentina Shevchenko is really at a point where she's just knocking off contenders, and it's going to take somebody with a serious grappling game to deal with her. Okay, so moving on. Just before they aired the co-main event, there was a video package announcing that Mark Ratner is being inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame. If people are not familiar with Mark Ratner, he's been with the UFC for over 15 years. He's a longtime Las Vegas, Nevada State Athletic Commission member. And at the time that the Fertitta brothers and Dana White bought the UFC, they brought Ratner on board with this explicit purpose of getting the UFC sanctioned, not just in Nevada, but across all 50 states and then ultimately internationally. And so he has a massive contribution to the sport of MMA because his work in getting MMA sanctioned benefited Bellator and Strikeforce and all these other promotions in America. So well-deserved. The video package was tremendous. They had a ton of great journalists and former UFC luminaries. So I recommend people go and check that out. And Eric, I don't know if you wanted to give any thoughts on Mark Ratner, the package, and his selection to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I don't have much to say that you didn't already say. I think everyone can agree it's a worthy induction. John Anik did note that the Hall of Fame ceremony would take place at some point in 2021, and they would induct both the class of 2020 and next year's class simultaneously. A class that will presumably be headlined by one Georges St-Pierre. So that's the most recent update we've gone on the Hall
All
of
right,
Fame.
something to look forward to next year. All right, so moving on in the card, third from the top, we had Platinum Mike Perry. Always lots of fun leading up to an event, always causing lots of, excitement. And this week was no different. He misses weight by 4.5 pounds or 4 pounds. What is it? Yeah, 4.5.
4.5, yeah.
Yeah, so the limit was 171, and he weighed in at 175.5. Looked like he was going to miss weight well ahead of time. Also bringing in his girlfriend, fiance, wife, who's pregnant, like very late. She had some good advice at one point in this fight, actually.
Yeah.
She didn't do so bad. Yeah. So why don't you tell us what happened in this one?
Okay, so yeah, like Phil already said, Perry misses weight by 4.5 pounds. He dabs on the scale, and he's fined 30% of his purse. The fight begins, and Perry, who's a very different fighter now than he was when he burst into the UFC, he immediately shoots for a takedown, and he's successful. He brings Means to the ground with a pretty solid body lock. Perry takes his back, and he begins to search for the rear naked choke. He was squeezing the jaw, but he was never too close to finishing it, in my opinion. Means rotates on top, and he gets back to his feet. There's not a lot of time left in the round, but I did think Means landed some solid shots towards the end of the round. He clearly seemed as though he was the more comfortable striker. Perry did land a nice right hook to the body, but that's how the round ended. I scored it for Mike Perry. How did you see it, Phil?
I had it for Perry as well. The takedown was very impressive and not something you expected. And then he almost got the submission, or it looked like he almost got the submission. He was certainly attacking it and forcing Means to defend. But yeah, once Means got up to the feet, it looked like Perry had spent himself a little bit.
Okay, so I agree completely. And moving into round two, this is where Means starts to take over the fight, mainly using his jab and some quick straight right hands. At one point he catches Perry with a right hook. It's early in the round, but it was a very solid shot. Means lands a right uppercut as Perry lunged forward, and this is something that you see a lot more throughout this round, and we'll touch on it in the next, in the sense that Perry, when he was striking, he would often lunge forward with, say, a big looping right hook or a big looping left hook, and Means was just quickly moving out of the way and countering him. This was a sequence that repeated itself multiple times. At one point, Perry did land a right hook, and it looked like it hurt Means, but he wasn't really able to capitalize on it, and Means quickly recovered. He went right back to work, landing a pretty strong elbow, and Perry was just walking into Means' jab over and over again. I thought this was a clear round for Means. Did you see it any differently?
Had it exactly the same.
All right. I think we're in the majority on that one, but hey, I did see some other scorecards out there. We'll get to that later. Perry, into round three, Perry immediately tries to take Means down, but he didn't have the success he had in the first. Obviously, he had expended quite a bit of his energy by then, but hey, this third round, it looked a lot different from the last two, because this third round turned into a slugfest. Both of these guys just met in the middle of the octagon, and they were trading back and forth. Means was landing more, but there were these stretches of time where they would just stand there and trade in the pocket, and Perry hits hard. That's not to discredit to Means, who obviously hits hard himself, but you could see the power differential between them when they were just standing there trading back and forth. Still, Means dominated the vast majority of the round. Okay, he doubled up Perry's striking, but this was a really fun round. I scored the fight 29-28 for Tim Means. How did you score it?
Yeah, I had it the same way. The third round, it was a close competitive fight, but Means clearly won rounds 2 and 3. 3, he took over, doubling up with. It was pretty much 2-1 on the strikes because Means would double up on the jab, and then Perry would land something big. There was a moment for about 20 seconds where it looked like it was going to get gnarly in there, and they were trading in the center. But once Means just added more movement and became a little bit more dynamic, he was able to take over and secure the round in what was a pretty exciting fight. Yeah, I mean, doesn't really do too much for the division. I mean, these guys have kind of been there, done that, but nonetheless, a fun fight for the fans.
Yeah. Yeah, the scorecards are red, and 2 of the judges agreed with us 29-28 Means, and 1 judge scored at 30-27 for Tim Means, which honestly I have trouble giving him first round, but hey, we've seen wilder scorecards.
That's right, yes. All right, so moving on to another women's flyweight match, this time between former title challenger Katlyn Chookagian and Cynthia Calvillo. Yeah, why don't you let us know what happened in this one, Eric?
Okay, so the fight begins and Calvillo lands a left hook right away and goes for a single leg. She brought Chookagian down, wasn't able to get top control or anything, and Chookagian just popped right back up. The difference in this fight was Chookagian had a significant reach advantage, and she was tagging Calvillo repeatedly. That was pretty much the story of the round. It wasn't as though it was a high-paced, exciting round, but I thought it was a pretty clear round for Katlyn Chookagian. The commentators, they stopped paying attention to the fight about halfway through. They decided to talk about turning the volume up and down on their headsets so they didn't have to hear Chookagian's screeches after every shot. I understand what they were saying. It was getting a bit much, but hey, that's the fight game. Going into round 2, it looked a lot like the first round. The difference maker was that reach advantage for Chookagian, and Calvillo just couldn't close the distance. Still, whenever she moved her way inside, she was landing some solid shots. That short left hook, she threw it repeatedly, and it looked like it was landing with more power than most of what Chookagian was offering. Again, I scored the round for Chookagian, but it was a bit closer than the first. So, as the third round starts, they show the striking numbers, and if memory serves correct, it's 46-41 for Katlyn Chookagian, and Joe Rogan decides to go full conspiracy mode. He just refuses to believe that the striking numbers were as close as they were, and he thought this was a masterful, dominant performance from Katlyn Chookagian, that she was untouchable in there, and he made a big stink about it throughout the first minutes about how there's no way those numbers were possibly accurate. Calvillo was, to her credit, more active this round for the most part, especially in the first half. She lands that left hook a few more times, and she was throwing more kicks this round, which was very helpful for her. Still, it wasn't like it was a super active round, and I scored this round for Katlyn Chookagian as well. Did you score?
So this round I actually did give to Calvillo. I thought that she moved forward more and just landed, was able to get inside a little bit. That was something she wasn't able to do. Chookagian was effective with her jab throughout the entire fight. Not necessarily landing it a whole lot, but she was able to just use it to keep her away, and Calvillo was able to essentially land nothing. I think Chookagian landed an elbow at one point that hurt Calvillo. It wasn't. It was sort of like a close. It wasn't that close. Like Chookagian clearly won the fight, but it wasn't also like a blowout at the same time.
Very well said. The judges agreed, scoring at 30-27 for Katlyn Chookagian. And as they were showing, before the official scorecards are read, they'll show highlights from the fight to fill time. And as they were showing the highlights, there were lots of Cynthia Calvillo highlights, who did land some shots throughout the fight. And once again, Joe Rogan, Mr. Conspiracy, he believed, he states very carefully selected highlights here, because he just cannot believe that this fight wasn't a blowout for Katlyn Chookagian. I found that, wow, it's pretty clear how I found that. Regardless, Katlyn Chookagian's kind of in a strange position in the division now. She has a loss to Valentina Shevchenko. It was pretty one-sided, but she's not going anywhere either. If your name isn't Valentina Shevchenko, she's clearly not an easy night at the office.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, has she fought Jennifer Maia? I mean, that kind of feels like it might be make the most sense right now, you know? If, you know.
I think she may have actually beat Jennifer Maia in the
Katlyn
past. I could be wrong on that.
Defeated her at UFC 244 a year ago. So, I mean, why don't we remember that? Who knows?
Hey, I remembered it. Where's my credit? Enough, regardless, yeah, she's in an interesting spot.
No. Okay, let's move on. So the main card opened with the rematch everyone demanded. Earlier, was it this year? That Shogun and Maurício Shogun Rua and Paul Bear Jew Craig fought to a draw, and so they had to run it back. How'd this one go?
Yeah, so their last fight, November of 2019, it ended in a split draw. I personally scored it for Shogun, but it was one of those fights where you could have scored anyway. I wouldn't have disagreed. It was a rematch nobody wanted, but hey, we got it, and it opened up the main card here. The first round begins, and Craig lands a number of kicks. Shogun backs him up at one point with a combination, but Craig just takes Shogun down pretty easily with a double leg. Shogun eventually made his way back to the feet, but he eats some knees in the process, and he gets pulled right back down to the ground. Shogun, there isn't much time left in the round, maybe like 40 seconds. Shogun reverses the position, and he ends up on top in half guard. He didn't really do much from that position, but that's what he had going for him, about 40 seconds of top control. I thought this was a very clear 10-9 round for Paul Craig. One of the judges actually disagreed and scored the round for Shogun. Thankfully, the fight didn't go that far because, hey, round 2 starts, and Rua, he's just eating jabs over and over again. It's sad to see how much he's slowed down from his prime. He's very tired as well after all the grappling in the first round. He does land a strong right hand at one point, but he kind of overcommitted to a follow-up where he just goes for the same thing again, and Craig takes him down. Shogun rotates out of it, back to his feet, but once again, Craig just drags him back down, easy as pie, and he takes his back. He flattens Shogun out, and he just rains down ground and pound strikes until Shogun taps from the ground and pound. Paul Craig is your winner by TKO at 3:36 of round 2. Phil, what were your thoughts on Paul Craig's victory?
I mean, it was pretty tough to watch Shogun Rua go out this way, but Craig did what he needed to do. He used his weight and size to carry Shogun to the ground and tire him out, and then eventually in the second round, he just got him to a point where he just had his way with him. Shogun didn't have anything left to be able to defend the positions, and that was mostly what it was. He couldn't even attempt to escape being flattened out. So, you know, Paul Craig gets the win, ends this mini rivalry, and, you know, onward and upward in the light heavyweight division. Hard to see where you go from here, but, you know, I guess it's, you know, next steps. Okay, so.
Yeah, I mean,
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I was going to move on, but you have something to say.
Okay, I was gonna say it's definitely kind of sad to see Shogun these days. He's just slowed down so much. He's had so many injuries, especially to those knees. He's tapping to Paul Craig from strikes in an empty arena. He still has fights left on his contract.
Yeah.
What would you like to see from
Shogun?
I
don't really want to see much from Shogun. I mean, we just saw Anderson Silva released from the UFC, and I'd argue he's in a better state in his career than Shogun is. I mean, I don't need to see him fight anymore. I didn't need to see this fight, but look, he did draw with Craig earlier this year. He's had some competitive fights in the last few years. So I can't
Oh,
say
he's
that.
only lost like 2 of his last 8 fights, but obviously they haven't been against the highest level of competition. And when you compare him to the Shogun of old, it's like we said earlier, he's just, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just not sure really who you put him up in there against with. Maybe you just continue to put him in there with new guys to build their name, but it's not really something I'm terribly eager to watch. Okay.
I feel sad just talking about it. Let's move on.
All right. So we already talked about the preliminary card. The top of the preliminary card was Brandon Moreno defeating Brandon Royval. So then we move on to the quick return of Joaquin Buckley. Buckley, of course, made famous last month or so with one of the most exciting finishes in UFC history, a spinning sidekick to the face. He was taking on Jordan Wright, who is also coming in this fight undefeated and looked like a pretty good prospect. So what went down in this one?
So seconds into the fight, they begin to aggressively wrestle in the clinch. Buckley lands a combination of hooks to the body and a left hand that left a noticeable mark on Wright's face. Wright avoids some big swings from Buckley, and he does connect with some kicks to the body as well as a solid one to the head. Buckley was like just marching forward, swinging for the fences, but he was getting countered pretty much as often as he landed. Towards the very end of the round, Buckley eventually corners him against the cage, and he just lets loose with those hooks. He completely overwhelms Wright, and he drops him. Wright, he holds on until the end of the round, but he is clearly in very rough shape. According to Joe Rogan, he's not responding to his cornermen between rounds. And as the second round begins, Buckley gives him no time to recover. He swarms him and lands a pair of hooks that just knock Wright unconscious. Joaquin Buckley is your winner by knockout at 18 seconds of the second round, and he calls out James Krause in this post-fight interview. What were your thoughts on this one?
I mean, this is what you got to do if you're going to make a name for yourself in the UFC. This is how you do it. You follow up one highlight reel knockout with another highlight reel knockout, and then call out somebody higher than you in the rankings. And yeah, get back in there real quick. I mean, we were talking about this, John and myself, last time about Buckley, how he was going to make a quick return. He did. And, he's making the UFC very happy. They love it when people come back real fast. And it seems like he was unscathed in this one. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him back soon again. And maybe it will be against Krause.
James Krause.
Okay, moving on. We in the women's flyweight division, the third women's flyweight fight. We had Antonina Shevchenko, the older sister of champion Valentina Shevchenko, taking on Ariane Lipski. So yeah, why don't you tell us about the action in this one?
Lipski lands a strong left hand just as the fight begins, and Shevchenko wastes no time in trying to bring the fight to the ground. At first, they kind of have a bit of a stalemate in the clinch, but eventually, maybe about halfway through the round, Shevchenko brings her down and she moves into half guard. She didn't land any big strikes or threaten any submissions, but I thought it was enough to score the round in her favor. Into round two, it kind of looks a bit like the first round where Lipski lands a big strike as the action begins, and Shevchenko, she just wants none of it. She brings Lipski down to the ground. And this is where the grappling discrepancy between the two was really apparent, as Shevchenko was able to control the entirety of the round with her grappling, and she's landing a lot more ground pound strikes. She kind of gets into half guard, if memory serves correct, and she's throwing down ground and pound shot after ground and pound shot as Lipski kind of covers up, and the referee is warning Lipski she has to move, she has to improve her position, but she was unable to, and Antonina Shevchenko picks up the TKO victory at 4:33 of round two. What were your thoughts on Shevchenko compared to her previous UFC
Look,
fights?
she clearly made some massive improvements in the grappling department since taking on Katlyn Chookagian a couple years ago and losing and being dominated on the ground. who is this opponent? Ariane Lipski. I mean, this is certainly not the most elite grappler, but nonetheless, Shevchenko showed significant improvement and just demonstrated the same type of well-rounded attitude that her sister possesses. And so I look forward to seeing her, continue to climb the rankings, and maybe after a few more fights, she can get a Chookagian rematch. That'd be pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, as you said, Lipski isn't the strongest grappler, so I'm not one of those people who are going to come out here and just say, clearly Shevchenko has improved miles on the ground since her last fight, but it was where she got dominated against Katlyn Chookagian, and that's where she dominated this one. So this was as great of a performance as she could have asked for.
All right, so opening up the preliminary card was Daniel Rodriguez taking on longtime UFC veteran Nicolas Dalby. Why don't you give us a brief summary of what these 3 rounds showed us?
So the first round was very close. Dalby is the more active fighter, throwing a lot of leg kicks, and Rodriguez, I wouldn't go as far to say that he's hesitant, but he isn't pushing things forward. He is outstriking Rodriguez by Dalby, that is outstriking Rodriguez by a significant amount, and he landed a few left hands to mix things up. Can't find my words. Must be getting late or something.
This is early for you.
Regardless. It's a bit early, yeah. Near the end of the round, Rodriguez starts to turn it around. He fires up. He lands a bunch of left hands as Dalby tried to circle out of it. Again, this was a close round, but I gave the edge to Rodriguez. Going into round 2, Rodriguez keeps the pressure up to begin the round, but he fades quickly. Not that he's tired, but Dalby's circling away. He's by far the more active fighter, and he lands a ton of leg kicks. I thought Dalby evened it up on the scorecards. Going into round 3, it looks a lot like round 2. Rodriguez's biggest problem is he's just not active enough. When he is landing, he's landing harder, but Dalby just kind of outworked him here, and I scored the fight 29-28 in his favor. 2 of the judges agreed with me, and 1 scored it 30-27. The commentators thought this was the biggest robbery in the history of the sport. How did you see it?
So I scored this one 30-27 for Dalby. I think 29-28 is fine as well. Yeah, it was pretty much Rodriguez just couldn't get off, mostly because Dalby was just effectively using his jab and even just feinting and missing just enough to keep Rodriguez away. A lot of people online I saw were surprised at this decision as well. I mean, you can make a case because Dalby didn't really land too much power-wise. I mean, there was a couple times he did back up Rodriguez. But look, I mean, I wouldn't split hairs about it. This was not a thrilling fight, and I wouldn't recommend anybody go back and watch it just because it was controversial. So,
yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. Okay,
well
so moving on to the early preliminary portion of the event, we got treated to what I would imagine is going to be the fight of the night. Alain Jouban was returning to take on Jared Gooden. You weren't terribly excited about this one, but it turned out to be a barn burner.
Yes, it was. I thought Jouban was looking a bit slower in his last couple fights, and he's been a pretty inactive fighter. But hey, did you know this guy is turning 39 next week? I couldn't believe
No,
that.
I didn't.
Regardless, yeah. Regardless, he comes out, and this was a barn burner of a fight. Yeah, Gooden was giving Jouban no room early. He's pressing forward, throwing a ton of jabs, and Jouban responded with a number of kicks to the body. Gooden backs Jouban up with an accidental headbutt, but Jouban recovered pretty quickly, and he continued his attack to the body. Jouban's right eye was beginning to swell shut, but it didn't seem to be bothering him too much. He landed a couple more powerful body kicks, and Gooden connected with a straight right hand. I thought this was a super close round, but I did give the edge to Alain Jouban. Going into round 2, Gooden hurts him early with a 1-2, but he couldn't really capitalize on it, and Jouban just returns fire. He lands a bunch of left hands, and Gooden was kind of staggering around the cage. Gooden, he was just eating shot after shot, but this man would not go down, and both men were looking exhausted by the end of the round. Before things concluded, however, Gooden fires back with a big right hand, and the round concludes with Jouban just walking him down. He couldn't miss every time he was throwing in combination. I scored this round for Alan Jouban as well, so I had him up 2-0 going into the final round. Going into round 3, Gooden lands a strong right hand, but Jouban goes right back to the body. His spy shots didn't have quite as much behind them as they did in the first round, considering how exhausted they were, but you could still hear them echoing throughout the empty arena. There was a low blow that paused the action momentarily, but things got back going quickly. Jouban connects with a body kick, and Gooden backs him off with a pretty quick combination. Gooden went for a takedown late in the round, and Jouban jumps on a guillotine. He doesn't finish the submission, but it was razor close, and I believe Jared Gooden actually stated that he did tap, as Joe Rogan pointed out on the broadcast, but the ref just didn't see it, and the fight went to the scorecards. Every judge saw it the same way, 30-27 for Alan Jouban. I thought this was a fantastic fight, and how did you feel about it, Phil?
Yeah, it was a great fight from start to finish. I actually scored it 30-28 with the last round being 10-10, which now seems silly if he actually, I didn't hear that he said he tapped from that, because I thought that the round, I thought it was a pretty close round. I thought Gooden came out there firing hard, and the difference in the fight was Gooden had power, had a little bit more power. Alan had enough power and really good timing, along with lots of combinations. There were several times in this fight where he threw some Street Fighter combos in here and just stayed really active and was able to just outwork Gooden all throughout the fight. So yeah, really exciting fight. If you didn't get a chance to see it, I highly recommend checking it out. All right, we also had, prior to that, we had Kyle Daukaus versus Dustin Stoltzfus. I mean, this was pretty much just Daukaus dominating with range and Stoltzfus not able to land any wrestling. I mean, Daukaus kind of dominated this whole fight. I had him winning rounds 1, 2, and then 10-8 in the third round. Did you see it any different?
No, I scored it exactly the same. I might have went 30-27 for the final round. My memory isn't going back that far anymore. I will say it felt like he could have finished the fight pretty much any time he wanted to if he just backed off and started and kept to his striking. But he repeatedly engaged in the grappling, where, to his credit, he was winning the grappling exchanges. It just wasn't as dominant as the striking was. Yeah. Daukaus showed a lot of impressive traits. He looks huge. If he can, just sort of put things together, balance things out, I think he's a pretty interesting prospect. Okay, and the opening fight of the night was a pretty good one. We had Louis Cosce. Is that how you pronounce it? That one I got wrong. He was making... Cosce, okay. He was making his UFC debut also against Sasha Palatnikov, who was making his UFC debut as well. And it turned out to be a pretty good fight. Yeah, it was a really fun fight. Cosce was a pretty massive favorite coming into this. He's finished all 7 of his professional fights in the first round. And early in the first, it looked like it was going that way. He catches a kick from Palatnikov, if my memory serves correctly. And Cosce just swarms him with a bunch of strikes on the ground. It looked like it was close to being stopped a few times. And when Cosce did pick himself up, he was dropped, but he somehow recovered. And this is when the fight just completely turned around. Cosce had went through a ton of energy trying to finish him, and Palatnikov just unleashes. He makes a full comeback. He's landing right hand after right hand and lands a huge spinning back fist to end the round. this round was crazy. Each man landed 51 strikes throughout the round, and this is probably a top 5 round of the year. I don't think that's crazy. This fight was insane.
Yeah, a crazy
going into round 2. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it was a crazy opening round. It was wild. Cosce came out strong, tried to finish, then looked tired, and looked like he was gonna struggle, but he was able to hang in there.
So quickly going through the next 2 rounds, Cosce's exhausted and Palatnikov's not that fresh either, but the difference between them is Cosce's never seen a second round before, while Palatnikov has a 5-round experience, and you could see that playing out throughout the next 2 rounds. Palatnikov, it's still a brawl, but Palatnikov has a slight edge in this wild fight. He's a bit busier, especially after a couple of low blows paused the action. And going into the 3rd round, Palatnikov lands the strong kick to the body, and not long thereafter, he lands this powerful right hand. And as Cosce, who is exhausted and hurt, tries to go for a takedown, Palatnikov stuffs it, and he just lands punch after punch as Cosce shells up, and the fight stopped. Sasha Palatnikov wins by TKO at 2:27 round 3.
Yeah, very impressive debut. Showed a lot of composure. He had a lot of cardio in this fight, and pretty exciting debut. I think people are going to look forward to seeing him in the future. He had a good post-fight interview, and yeah, pretty exciting prospects. Sasha Palatnikov. And Cosce looked pretty good here as well. I mean, he had moments in this fight. He showed a lot of power. If he can get his cardio sorted out. This, as you mentioned, this was the first time he'd seen round 2. So I think he's got a little bit of potential as well. All right, so that wraps...
This was a great way to kick up the card.
Yeah. All right, so that wraps up UFC 255. Maybe you can find out if there's any bonuses or any of that stuff handed out, and I'll talk about what's coming up next week. So next week we've got the UFC is back at the UFC Apex in Las Vegas, Nevada, for a card I imagine you will be covering. It is headlined by Curtis Blades versus Derek Lewis. There's not too much else to talk about on here other than the return of Anthony Smith taking on Devin Clark. So not the deepest card. The weekend after that, we have Jack Hermanson taking on Kevin Holland. Kevin Holland making another quick return to the cage, but taking a big step up against Jack Hermanson. Let's see if there's anything else worthwhile on that card. Not so much. And then the next time that I will be back with John will be on December 12th for UFC 256. Right now, it looks like the headliner for that is going to be Peter Yan versus Aljamain Sterling. We also have Marvin Vittori versus Jacare Souza. Who else is on here?
Tony Ferguson.
That's
and Charles
right.
Oliveira
They did just add that. So that's most likely going to be the co-main event. Mackenzie Dern making a quick turnaround as well. Gavin Tucker, Chase Hooper on this card. So some things to look forward to for the last pay-per-view of the year. And then there's a stack card, Edwards versus Chimaev, right after that. So any thoughts?
Super stacked.
Yeah. So do we get any info on those bonuses?
Yes, sir. So Fight of the Night went out to Cosce and Palatnikov. Well deserved. I thought it was between that one and the...
Really? Yeah, I thought Jouban was a better fight. Interesting. Okay.
I think that opening round was the difference maker. And our performance bonuses went to Joaquin Buckley, no surprise there, and Antonina Shevchenko.
Okay, so Valentina campaigned for her sister to get the bonus, and she got it. So happy family.
That's right.
Yeah, happy family. All right. So that wraps up our UFC 255 post show. As I mentioned, John and I will be back for UFC 256. Eric will be back covering next weekend's event. Is there anything else that you want to say to the people out there, Eric?
No, thanks for having me here tonight, Phil. I'm a better writer than a speaker, but still, it was nice to jump on here with you and talk a bit of MMA.
Oh, I think you did a great job, and I think the fans would agree. You're giving John a run for his money. And yeah, so, and once again, we just wanted to send our love.
Things like that.
We wanted to send our love to the Pollock family for their new edition, and we know that they're up now at 2:20 watching this UFC 255 post show, because what else could they be doing? So hello to everyone in the Pollock household, and thank you to everybody listening at home, and we will see you next time. All right, take care.
Peace.